Sarah Chen checked her watch as the first snowflakes began to fall. The weather forecast had been wrong again. What started as a routine safety inspection of the mountain trails was quickly turning into something more serious. She pulled her radio closer to her mouth and pressed the button. Base camp. This is Sarah. We're seeing heavy snowfall starting at elevation 8,200 feet, visibility dropping fast. The static crackled back. Copy that, Sarah. Weather Service just updated. Storm front moving in 6 hours earlier than predicted. You need to get your team down now. Sarah looked at her 5 colleagues spread across the rocky outcrop. They were experienced rangers. But this mountain had claimed lives before. The Cascade Range was beautiful, but unforgiving. She had been leading safety inspections here for 8 years, and she knew when nature was about to show its teeth. Everyone, pack it up. We're heading down immediately. She called out. Marcus Williams, the newest member of their team, was examining a damaged trail marker about 50 yards away. The 26-year-old had joined their unit 6 months ago, fresh from training. He was eager but sometimes took risks that made Sarah nervous. Just give me 2 more minutes, Marcus shouted back. This marker is completely destroyed. If hikers come through here tomorrow, they could take the wrong path. Marcus, now. Sarah's voice carried the authority of someone who had seen what mountains could do to people who didn't respect them. The snow was falling harder. What had been gentle flakes were now thick, wet chunks that stuck to everything. Sarah could feel the temperature dropping. Her breath came out in visible puffs. The wind was picking up too, making a low howling sound through the pine trees. She began walking toward Marcus when she heard it. A deep rumbling sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Sarah froze. She had heard that sound before, 7 years ago, when she had barely escaped with her life. Avalanche, she screamed. The mountain above them had been loaded with new snow for weeks. The recent warm weather had created unstable layers. Now the storm was adding weight and wind. It was a perfect recipe for disaster. Sarah saw the snow cloud before she saw the actual slide. It looked like a white fog rushing down the mountainside. But she knew what was behind it. Tons of snow, ice, and debris moving at highway speeds. Everyone down the south slope, now. The team scattered. Sarah's training kicked in. She grabbed her emergency pack and started running toward the designated escape route. The south slope was steeper, but it was their only chance. The avalanche was coming down the main face of the mountain, right toward their position. She could see Jessica Martinez and Tom Bradley ahead of her, their orange safety vests bright against the darkening sky. Behind her, she could hear the others following. The sound of the avalanche was getting louder, like a freight train getting closer. Stay together, Sarah yelled, though her voice was almost lost in the wind and the approaching roar. The snow under her feet was getting deeper with each step. Her legs were working hard to push through it. She could feel sweat on her back despite the cold. Her lungs burned in the thin mountain air. Marcus appeared next to her, his face pale with fear. Is that what I think it is? Just run, Sarah said through gritted teeth. They had maybe 2 minutes before the avalanche reached their position. The south slope was steep and rocky. If they could get below the tree line, they might have some protection. The trees could break up the snow flow. Sarah looked back and did a quick count. Jessica and Tom were ahead. Marcus was beside her. Behind them she could see David Kim and Elena Rodriguez. Everyone was accounted for. That's when the ground gave way. Sarah had been focusing on the avalanche coming down from above. She hadn't noticed that the snow under their feet was also unstable. The weight of 6 people running had triggered a smaller slide right where they stood. The world suddenly tilted. Sarah felt herself falling, tumbling in a chaos of snow and rocks. She heard screams, but couldn't tell if they were her own. Snow filled her mouth and nose. She couldn't tell which way was up. Training took over. Sarah forced herself to stay calm. She moved her arms in a swimming motion, trying to stay near the surface of the flowing snow. She protected her face with her hands to create an air pocket. The slide seemed to go on forever, but it was probably only 30 seconds. When it finally stopped, Sarah found herself buried in snow up to her chest. She could breathe, which meant her head was above the surface. That was good. She spit out snow and tried to call for her team. Everyone sound off. Marcus. Jessica. Silence. The only sound was the wind and the settling of snow. Sarah worked to free herself from the snow that held her legs. It was packed tight, almost like concrete. She used her gloved hands to dig, but it was slow work. The snow was cold and wet. Her fingers were already getting numb. After 10 minutes of digging, she managed to free herself. She stood up and looked around. The landscape had completely changed. What had been a rocky slope was now a smooth field of white. There was no sign of her team. Sarah pulled out her avalanche beacon and switched it to search mode. The device could detect signals from other beacons up to 50 meters away. She started walking in a grid pattern, listening for the beeping that would indicate someone was buried nearby. Nothing. She tried her radio. Base camp, this is Sarah. We've been hit by an avalanche. I'm separated from my team. Please respond. Base camp. Please respond. Only static. Sarah climbed to higher ground and tried again. Still nothing. The storm was interfering with radio signals, and she might be in a dead zone. She pulled out her GPS unit. The screen showed her location, but it was wrong. According to the device, she was 3 miles from where she thought she was. The avalanche had carried her much farther than she realized. The snow was still falling heavily. Her team was out there somewhere, possibly buried, possibly injured. But Sarah was alone on a mountain in a blizzard. With limited supplies and failing daylight, she made the hardest decision of her career. She had to find shelter and wait out the storm. She couldn't help her team if she froze to death or got lost in the blizzard. Sarah found a cluster of large rocks that provided some wind protection. She used her emergency shovel to dig out a snow cave. It was basic, but it would keep her alive through the night. As she worked, she thought about her team. Marcus, with his eagerness and quick smile. Jessica, who had 3 kids at home. Tom, who was planning to retire next year. David, who coached Little League baseball. Elena, who was studying to become a paramedic. Were they alive? Were they injured? Were they looking for her? Sarah knew that search and rescue teams would be mobilized, but the storm would keep helicopters grounded. Ground teams would have to wait for better weather. Her team was on their own for now. She finished her shelter and crawled inside. The snow cave was cramped but warm. Sarah pulled out her emergency rations and forced herself to eat. She would need energy for whatever came next. Outside, the storm raged on. The wind made a constant howling sound. Occasionally she could hear trees cracking under the weight of snow. Sarah tried her radio every hour, but got only static. She conserved her batteries as much as possible. The GPS showed she was in a valley she didn't recognize. The avalanche had carried her far from the main trail system. She had enough food for 3 days. Maybe 4 if she was careful. Her water situation was good since she could melt snow. But the temperature was dropping. And she only had basic winter gear. Sarah had been in dangerous situations before, but never completely alone. She thought about her training at the mountain rescue school. The instructors had emphasized that survival was as much mental as physical. She needed to stay positive and focused. She also thought about her family. Her parents in California, who worried about her dangerous job. Her sister, who kept asking when she was going to find a nice office job. They would be devastated if she didn't make it home, but mostly she thought about her team. They were her responsibility. She was the senior ranger, the one with the most experience. She should have recognized the avalanche danger sooner. She should have gotten them out of there faster. As the night wore on, the storm began to ease slightly. Sarah could hear the change in the wind. Maybe by morning the weather would clear enough for her to start looking for her colleagues. She dozed fitfully, waking every few hours to check her watch and listen to the storm. Around midnight, she thought she heard something different. Not wind or settling snow, but something else. Sarah held her breath and listened carefully. There it was again. A faint sound, almost like someone calling for help. but it was so faint she couldn't be sure. She unzipped her sleeping bag and listened at the entrance to her snow cave. The sound came again, carried on the wind. It was definitely human, but she couldn't make out words. Sarah faced a choice. She could stay in her shelter where she was safe, or she could go out into the storm to investigate. It could be one of her team members, or it could be her imagination, and she could get lost and die in the blizzard. The sound came once more, a little clearer this time. Someone was out there, and they needed help. Sarah grabbed her flashlight and emergency pack. She marked her shelter with reflective tape so she could find it again. Then she stepped out into the storm. The wind immediately tried to knock her down. Snow stung her face like needles. Her flashlight beam barely penetrated 5 feet in the blowing snow. But Sarah forced herself forward, following the direction where she thought the sound had come from. She called out every few steps. "Hello, can you hear me? I'm coming." The cold was brutal. Sarah could feel it seeping through her layers of clothing. Her fingers were going numb, even inside her gloves. But she kept going. After 20 minutes of searching, she found him. Marcus was sitting against a tree, barely conscious. His left leg was clearly broken, bent at an unnatural angle. Blood had frozen on his forehead where he had hit something during the avalanche, but he was alive. "Sarah?" he mumbled when her flashlight found him. I thought I was going to die out here." "You're going to be fine," Sarah said, though she wasn't sure that was true. "I'm going to get you back to my shelter." Marcus was too injured to walk. Sarah would have to carry him, and her shelter was at least a quarter-mile away. In the storm, that might as well be 100 miles. But Sarah Chen had not spent 8 years in mountain rescue to give up now. She rigged a makeshift sled using her sleeping pad and some rope from her pack. It wasn't perfect, but it would allow her to drag Marcus through the snow. The trip back to her shelter was the longest half-hour of Sarah's life. The storm seemed to fight her every step. Several times she lost her way and had to backtrack. Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness, but finally, Sarah saw the reflective tape marking her snow cave. She managed to get Marcus inside and out of the wind. She gave him warm liquids from her thermos and wrapped him in her spare sleeping bag. "The others," Marcus whispered. "Jessica and Tom were right behind me when the slide hit." "I saw David and Elena get swept toward the trees." Sarah nodded. Now, she knew her team was still out there somewhere. As soon as the storm cleared, she would have to find them. But first, she had to keep Marcus alive through the night. His leg needed proper medical attention, and he was showing signs of hypothermia. Sarah did what she could with her first aid supplies. But it wasn't enough. She tried her radio again. This time, she got a faint response. "Sarah, this is Rescue Base. Can barely, you." The signal was breaking up, but it was contact. Help was coming. But not until the weather cleared. Sarah settled in to wait. Outside, the storm continued to rage. But now she wasn't alone anymore. She had found one of her team members alive. 4 more were still out there somewhere in the darkness and cold. Sarah checked her watch. It was 2 a.m., and the longest night of her life was far from over. She had no way of knowing that this was just the beginning of an ordeal that would test everything she had ever learned about survival. The mountain wasn't done with them yet. Dawn came slowly to the mountain. Sarah had barely slept, checking on Marcus every hour through the night. His breathing was steady but shallow. The makeshift splint on his leg seemed to be holding. Most importantly, his body temperature had stabilized. Sarah crawled to the entrance of their snow cave and looked outside. The storm had finally passed. The sky was clear, and sunlight was beginning to hit the snow-covered slopes. Everything was blindingly white and eerily quiet. She pulled out her radio and tried again. This time the signal came through clearly. "Search base, this is Ranger Chen. Do you copy?" "Sarah, thank God. We've been trying to reach you all night. What's your status?" "I have 1 team member with me. Marcus Williams. Injured but stable. 4 others still missing. I need coordinates for search teams." "Negative on ground teams, Sarah. The avalanche area is still too unstable. We've got helicopters on standby, but they need clear landing zones. Can you mark your position? Sarah looked around. They were in a narrow valley surrounded by steep slopes, no place for a helicopter to land safely. Negative on helicopter extraction. I'm going to search for the others on foot. Sarah, that's not advisable. You should stay put and wait for rescue. But Sarah was already making plans. She couldn't sit and wait while her team members might be dying out there. Marcus was stable enough to be left alone for a few hours. I'll check in every 2 hours. Sarah out. She turned to Marcus, who had been listening to the radio conversation. His eyes were clearer now, more focused. You can't leave me here, he said weakly. I have to find the others. You'll be safe in this shelter. I'll mark the location so rescue teams can find you. Sarah prepared for her search. She left most of her food and medical supplies with Marcus. She took her avalanche beacon, GPS, and emergency gear. Most importantly, she took a small folding shovel. If she found someone buried, she would need to dig them out quickly. Before leaving, Sarah studied her surroundings carefully. The avalanche had created a massive debris field that stretched down the valley. Broken trees, scattered rocks, and mounds of snow marked the path of destruction. She started her search at the top of the debris field and worked her way down in a grid pattern. Her avalanche beacon remained silent. After an hour of searching, Sarah began to worry that the others had been carried even farther away. Then she saw something that made her heart race. A flash of orange fabric sticking out of the snow about 200 yards away. The bright orange of their safety vests. Sarah ran toward it, her legs sinking deep into the soft snow with each step. As she got closer, she could see it was definitely part of a ranger uniform. She activated her beacon and got a strong signal. Someone was buried here. Sarah began digging frantically with her shovel. The snow was packed tight from the avalanche, but she worked with desperate energy. 3 feet down, her shovel hit something solid. It was Jessica Martinez. She was unconscious but breathing. Sarah cleared snow from her face and checked her pulse. It was weak, but steady. Jessica had been buried for over 10 hours, but somehow she was still alive. Sarah knew she had to work fast. Jessica was suffering from severe hypothermia. Her lips were blue and her skin was cold to the touch. Sarah wrapped her in an emergency blanket and tried to warm her with her own body heat. Jessica, can you hear me? You're safe now. I've got you. Jessica's eyes fluttered open. She tried to speak, but only made weak sounds. Don't try to talk. Just rest. I'm going to get you warm, and then we'll find the others. Sarah used her radio to report the find. The rescue coordinator was relieved but concerned about Jessica's condition. She needs immediate medical attention, Sarah. Hypothermia that's severe can be fatal. I understand, but I can't carry both her and Marcus out of here, and I still have 3 team members missing. Sarah faced an impossible choice. She could stay with Jessica and try to keep her alive, or she could continue searching for the others. Every minute counted for all of them. She made a decision that went against every rescue protocol. Sarah built another emergency shelter near where she had found Jessica. She got Jessica as warm as possible and left her with food and hot liquids from her thermos. I'll be back, she promised. Hold on for me. Sarah marked the shelter and continued her search. Her beacon led her to another signal about a quarter-mile away. This time she found Tom Bradley. Tom was in worse shape than Jessica. He had been buried deeper and had suffered serious injuries during the avalanche. His right arm was clearly broken, and he had a severe head injury, but he was conscious and talking. Sarah, thought you were dead, he whispered. Not today, Tom. How do you feel? Like I got hit by a truck. Where are the others? Sarah told him about Marcus and Jessica. She didn't mention that she still hadn't found David and Elena. I saw them get swept toward the trees, Tom said. David was trying to help Elena. She twisted her ankle before the slide hit. Sarah knew the tree line was another half-mile down the valley. If David and Elena had been carried that far, they could be anywhere in several square miles of wilderness. I'm going to get you to shelter, then keep looking, Sarah said. No, Tom said firmly. I can wait here. Find David and Elena first. They've been out there longer than Jessica and me. Sarah knew Tom was right, but leaving injured people alone went against everything she had learned in rescue training. Still, she was the only person who could search for the missing team members. Sarah built a minimal shelter for Tom and gave him an emergency radio so he could call for help if his condition worsened. Then she continued down the valley. The sun was getting higher, and the snow was starting to soften slightly. That was good for digging, but bad for stability. Sarah knew she was working against time before the afternoon sun made the remaining snow on the slopes dangerous again. Her beacon stayed silent as she approached the tree line. The avalanche debris was spread out here, mixed with broken trees and scattered rocks. If David and Elena were buried in this area, it would be much harder to find them. Sarah expanded her search pattern, working back and forth through the debris field. She called their names every few minutes, but heard no response. After 2 hours of searching, she was beginning to lose hope. Then she heard something that made her freeze. A faint tapping sound. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause. The universal distress signal. Sarah followed the sound to a pile of broken trees near the edge of the avalanche zone. The tapping was coming from underneath the debris. David, Elena, can you hear me? The tapping stopped, then started again, faster and more urgent. Sarah began moving logs and branches, working toward the source of the sound. The debris was heavy and awkward to move, but adrenaline gave her strength. She found them in a small pocket created by 2 large fallen trees. David Kim was conscious and alert. Elena Rodriguez was beside him, unconscious but breathing. David had been using a piece of metal to tap against the trees. "Sarah, thank God," David said when he saw her. "We've been trapped here all night." Elena hit her head during the slide. She wakes up for a few minutes, then passes out again. Sarah squeezed into the small space to examine Elena. She had a serious concussion and possible internal injuries. Her breathing was shallow, and her pulse was irregular. "We need to get her to a hospital immediately," Sarah said. "I know. But I couldn't leave her. She saved my life during the avalanche. Pushed me toward this pocket before the debris hit us." Sarah understood. David had made the same choice she had been making all day. You don't abandon your teammates, no matter what. The space where David and Elena were trapped was too small for Sarah to reach them properly. She would have to remove more debris to get them out. It was dangerous work. The pile of trees and rocks was barely stable. One wrong move could bring the whole thing down. But Sarah had no choice. She worked carefully, testing each piece of debris before moving it. David helped from inside, pushing logs when Sarah pulled them. It took an hour to clear enough space to get Elena out safely. By the time they freed her, Elena was barely conscious. David wasn't much better. He had been protecting Elena from the cold all night, giving her his own body heat. Sarah now had 5 injured team members scattered across miles of mountain wilderness. She was exhausted, running low on supplies, and the afternoon sun was making avalanche conditions dangerous again. She used her radio to update the rescue coordinator on her findings. The response was not what she wanted to hear. "Sarah, you've done incredible work, but you need to stop. Weather Service is predicting another storm tonight. You need to get to safe shelter immediately. I can't leave them scattered across the mountain. Elena needs immediate medical attention. We're mobilizing every available resource, but ground crews can't reach you before nightfall. The helicopter teams say the terrain is too dangerous for extraction." Sarah looked at Elena, who was drifting in and out of consciousness. David was hypothermic and exhausted. A quarter-mile away, Tom was alone with serious injuries. Jessica was in shock from her long burial, and Marcus was waiting with a broken leg. One person couldn't take care of 5 critically injured people spread across miles of wilderness. It was impossible, but Sarah Chen had not come this far to give up now. She made a decision that would have been called reckless by any rescue manual. Sarah decided to move everyone to a central location where they could wait together for rescue. First, she helped David get Elena to a spot that was easier to reach. Then she went back for Tom. The man was tough. Despite his injuries, he was able to walk with Sarah's help. They made it to where David and Elena were waiting. Next, Sarah went back for Jessica. The hypothermia had weakened her badly, but she was conscious and able to move slowly with assistance. Finally, Sarah went back to get Marcus. He was the most difficult to move because of his broken leg. Sarah had to fashion a better sled and drag him across the rough terrain. By sunset, Sarah had all 5 of her team members together in a single shelter. It wasn't much. Just a depression in the snow protected by some large rocks. But it was better than having them scattered across the mountain. Everyone was injured. Everyone was hypothermic to some degree. Elena was the worst off. Barely responsive despite Sarah's efforts to keep her warm, Sarah did everything she could with her limited medical supplies. She splinted Tom's arm and Marcus's leg. She treated David's minor injuries. She monitored Jessica's recovery from hypothermia. Most critically, she kept checking on Elena, who seemed to be slipping away despite all her efforts. As darkness fell, the temperature began dropping again. Sarah could see clouds building on the horizon. The promised storm was coming. Sarah gathered her team around her. They were all conscious, except Elena, who was breathing but unresponsive. "Listen to me," Sarah said. "We've made it this far together. We're going to make it through the night. Rescue teams will reach us tomorrow." "What if they don't?" Jessica asked weakly. "They will," Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. "But we have to help them find us. I'm going to climb up to that ridge and set up a signal fire. The smoke will mark our position for miles." We mark our position for miles. You can't go back out there," David protested. "It's too dangerous. Someone has to. And I'm the only one who's not seriously injured." Sarah gathered dry wood and her emergency flares. The climb to the ridge would be treacherous in the dark, but a signal fire from that position would be visible across the entire valley. As she prepared to leave, Elena stirred and opened her eyes. For a moment, she seemed alert and focused. "Sarah," she whispered. "Thank you for not leaving us." "I would never leave you," Sarah replied. "Any of you." Elena smiled weakly and closed her eyes again. Sarah began her climb toward the ridge. Behind her, her team huddled together for warmth, waiting for rescue that might never come. The storm clouds were getting closer. Soon it would be snowing again, but Sarah climbed on, carrying with her the desperate hope that someone would see her signal and come for them before it was too late. The climb to the ridge took Sarah 2 hours in the darkness. Every step was a battle against exhaustion, cold, and terrain that tried to kill her. Loose rocks rolled under her feet. Ice-covered sections nearly sent her tumbling into the void below. Her headlamp provided only a small circle of light in the vast blackness, but Sarah pushed forward, driven by the knowledge that 5 lives depended on her reaching the top. When she finally reached the ridge, the view took her breath away. The entire valley spread out below her, silver in the moonlight. She could see the path of destruction the avalanche had carved down the mountain. In the distance, tiny lights marked where search and rescue teams were setting up base camps. Sarah quickly built her signal fire on the highest point of the ridge. She used dry wood she had carried up and her emergency flares to create a bright flame that would be visible for miles. The fire caught immediately, sending orange light dancing across the snow. Then she pulled out her radio and tried to reach the rescue teams. "Rescue base. This is Sarah Chen. I have a signal fire burning on Eagle Ridge. 5 injured rangers require immediate evacuation." The response came back strong and clear. "Sarah, we see your fire. Are you all okay?" "Negative. Multiple injuries, including severe hypothermia and head trauma. 1 team member is critical. We need medical evacuation as soon as possible." "Copy that. We have ground teams moving toward your position, but they won't reach you until morning. Helicopter evacuation is impossible in current conditions. Can your team hold out until dawn?" Sarah looked back down the mountain toward where her colleagues were waiting. The storm clouds were much closer now. Snow was already beginning to fall. "We'll have to," she said. Sarah kept the signal fire burning for another hour, using the last of her flares to make sure the rescue teams could track her position. Then she began the dangerous descent back to her team. The return trip was harder than the climb up. The new snow made the rocks slippery and unpredictable. Twice Sarah nearly fell when her footing gave way. But the thought of her team waiting for her kept her going. She made it back to their shelter just as the storm hit in full force. Wind and snow lashed the mountainside. The temperature plummeted. Inside their makeshift shelter, her team was barely holding on. Elena had gotten worse during Sarah's absence. Her breathing was shallow and irregular. Jessica was shivering uncontrollably, despite being wrapped in all their emergency blankets. Tom's injured arm had swollen badly. David was trying to stay strong, but exhaustion was winning. Only Marcus seemed stable, though his broken leg was causing him severe pain. "Did you reach them?" David asked as Sarah crawled into the shelter. "Yes. Ground teams are on their way, but they won't get here until morning. We have to make it through one more night." Sarah took charge of organizing their survival. She redistributed their remaining food and water to make sure everyone got some nutrition. She repositioned the team to share body heat more effectively. She checked everyone's injuries and did what she could with their limited medical supplies. Most importantly, she kept everyone talking and alert. In severe hypothermia, falling asleep could mean death. "Tell me about your families," Sarah said. "What are you going to do when we get off this mountain?" Tom talked about his retirement plans. He wanted to buy a small farm and raise horses. Jessica described her children, ages 8, 10, and 12, who were probably terrified that their mom wasn't coming home. David talked about his baseball team and how they were counting on him to coach them to the championship. Marcus, despite his pain, talked about his girlfriend and their plans to get married in the spring. He had been planning to propose when he got back from this assignment. Elena drifted in and out of consciousness, but when she was alert, she talked about her dream of becoming a paramedic. She wanted to save lives, she said. She wanted to help people the way Sarah was helping all of them. Sarah shared stories about her own family and her reasons for becoming a ranger. She had always loved the mountains. But more than that, she loved helping people experience them safely. Every person she guided safely down a trail. Every hiker she helped in an emergency. It all mattered. As the night wore on, the storm grew more intense. Their shelter was barely holding together under the wind and snow. Sarah had to go outside several times to reinforce their walls and clear snow from the entrance. Each time she went outside, the cold hit her like a physical blow. The wind tried to knock her down. Snow stung her face and hands. But each time she came back in, her team was still alive. Around 3 a.m., Elena took a turn for the worse. She stopped responding to voices, and her breathing became very weak. Sarah knew she was losing her. "Elena, stay with me," Sarah said, rubbing her hands and arms to try to stimulate circulation. "Come on, Elena. Your family needs you. Your future patients need you." For a moment, Elena's eyes opened and focused on Sarah. "Don't let me die here," she whispered. "I won't," Sarah promised. "I'm getting you home." Sarah worked frantically to warm Elena up. She gave her the last of the hot liquids from her thermos. She wrapped her in her own sleeping bag. She even lay next to her, sharing her body heat. Slowly, Elena's breathing stabilized. Her pulse got a little stronger. She wasn't out of danger, but she was fighting. Dawn came slowly to the mountain. The storm began to ease around 5 a.m. By 6 a.m., the snow had stopped and the wind had died down. Sarah could hear something that made her heart race with hope. Voices. Human voices calling from somewhere down the valley. Sarah grabbed her radio. "Rescue team, this is Sarah Chen. Are you in the debris field?" "Sarah. This is Ground Team Alpha. We're about half a mile from your signal fire location. Can you guide us to your position?" "Affirmative. I'm coming to meet you." Sarah looked at her team. They had made it through the night, but everyone was in bad shape. Elena was barely conscious. Jessica was weak from hypothermia. Tom, David, and Marcus were exhausted and in pain from their injuries. "I'm going to bring them back," Sarah told her team. "Stay alert. Help is almost here." Sarah left the shelter and began hiking toward the rescue voices. The new snow made walking difficult, but she pushed forward with renewed energy. After 36 hours of hell, Rescue was finally within reach. She found the search team working their way up through the avalanche debris. There were 8 rescuers with medical equipment, communications gear, and enough supplies to handle multiple casualties. When they saw Sarah emerging from the snow-covered wilderness, they could hardly believe what they were seeing. The team leader was Jim Morrison, a veteran search and rescue specialist who had worked with Sarah before. "Sarah, my God, you look like you've been through hell." And she had. Sarah's clothing was torn and dirty. Her face was windburned and cut from flying ice. Her hands were raw from digging in the snow. She had lost weight and could barely stand upright, but her eyes were clear and determined. "I have 5 injured rangers about a quarter mile from here," Sarah said without preamble. 1 critical head injury, multiple hypothermia cases, broken bones. We need immediate medical attention. "How did you find them all?" Jim asked as his team prepared their equipment. "I never stopped looking," Sarah said simply. Sarah led the rescue team through the debris field to where her colleagues were waiting. The medics immediately went to work on Elena, who was in the worst condition. They started IVs, checked vital signs, and prepared her for evacuation. Within minutes, they had everyone stabilized and ready for transport. The rescue team had brought specialized sleds that could carry injured people safely across rough terrain. "We'll have you all out of here within 2 hours, Jim promised. As the evacuation began, Sarah finally allowed herself to feel relief. Her team was safe. They were all going to survive. The trip down the mountain took most of the morning. The rescue team moved carefully, taking no chances with their patients. Sarah walked alongside, refusing medical attention for herself until her team was safely off the mountain. When they finally reached the base camp, ambulances were waiting. Elena was rushed immediately to a helicopter that flew her to the regional trauma center. Jessica, Tom, David, and Marcus were taken to local hospitals for treatment. Sarah watched the ambulances drive away, carrying her teammates to safety. Only then did she allow the medics to examine her. She had frostbite on her fingers and toes. She was dehydrated and exhausted. She had several cuts and bruises from her ordeal. But she was alive, and more importantly, her entire team was alive. News crews were waiting at the hospital. The story of the ranger who had single-handedly rescued her entire team from an avalanche quickly spread across the country. Reporters wanted interviews. Television producers called with offers. But Sarah just wanted to see her team. She visited each of them in the hospital. Elena was unconscious but stable. The doctors said she would make a full recovery. Jessica was being treated for severe hypothermia, but was alert and talking. Tom needed surgery on his broken arm but was in good spirits. David had been released after treatment for minor injuries. Marcus would need surgery on his leg, but was already joking with the nurses. "You saved all of us," Marcus said when Sarah visited his room. "How can we ever thank you?" "You don't need to thank me," Sarah replied. "We're a team. That's what teams do." The investigation into the avalanche found that it had been triggered by unusual weather conditions that were impossible to predict. No one was blamed for the accident. The rescue operation was praised as one of the most successful mountain rescues in state history. Sarah was offered commendations, awards, and recognition from multiple organizations. But she turned down most of the ceremonies and interviews. She didn't want to be called a hero. She had simply done her job. 3 months later, when her team had recovered from their injuries, they returned to work together. Elena had decided to continue with her paramedic training. Marcus had proposed to his girlfriend, and they were planning a summer wedding. Tom was still talking about retirement, but he wanted to finish out his career with the team that had become like family to him. Jessica brought her children to meet Sarah. They wanted to thank the woman who had saved their mother's life. David invited Sarah to watch his baseball team play in the championship game they won that spring. The avalanche had changed all of them. They had faced death together and survived. They knew that they could count on each other no matter what. Sarah continued leading safety inspections in the mountains. She was more cautious now, more aware of how quickly conditions could change. But she was not afraid. The mountains were still her home, and helping people safely experience them was still her calling. Sometimes, on clear days when she stood on high ridges looking out over the valleys below, Sarah thought about that terrible night when she had climbed through the storm to light the signal fire. She remembered the moment when she had seen the rescue team's lights in the distance and knew that help was coming. People called what she did heroic. They said she had emerged from hell, carrying her team back to safety. But Sarah knew the truth was simpler than that. She had never left them behind, because they had never left each other behind. In the end, that was what had saved them all. The mountains had tested them, and they had passed the test together. Sarah Chen returned to the high country every day, watching over other hikers and climbers, making sure they stayed safe. She carried the radio that had connected her to rescue that night. She carried the memories of her team's courage and determination. Most of all, she carried the knowledge that when everything went wrong, when nature showed its cruelest face, ordinary people could do extraordinary things for each other. And sometimes, that was enough to bring everyone home alive.